My research shows the bank of mum and dad is the fifth biggest bank in Australia. They can't actually put their finger on how much parents are lending because it is such a grey area. You could really do something for the love of your child, but it has all these unintended consequences that come with it. It could bite you in the butt. It could have a major knock-on effect to your asset position.
And then the relationship busts up a couple of years down the track, unless you try and secure that somehow in that relationship, you can end up half the money walks out the door.
Do it for one child, you've got to do it for another.
How does that fall into your estate plan and your will and so forth? Particularly if you've got, as you say, they've got other siblings and they haven't benefited. And how do you compensate for that? You do it, then you try and mop up things after and go, well, hang on, that's now an asset. What happens if something happens to us, we pass away?
I guess the phrase that comes to mind is unintended consequences.
Start early and plan. Whether or not you can kick off a savings plan, at least start thinking about it, that when you have the opportunity and maybe surplus income and the ability to do it, you start.
If you know anyone that's kind of wrestling with these topics, conversations, share this episode with them. G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Today's chat, we're going to cover a fair bit of turf today. We're going to talk about the bank of mum and dad. We're going to talk about superannuation. We're going to talk about quality financial advice. I've brought in a great guest, Colin Lewis. You've come in, mate. Thank you very much for joining me in the studio today.
Thanks, Aaron. Pleasure to be here.
I really appreciate it. Mate, I have been reading a lot of your articles in the AFR. I've got to say, mate, it's a real pleasure to have you here. The quality of what you write about, I'd say you're a pretty straight shooter.
Thanks. Yeah, I like to give information out. I really do, and help people. And if it helps them on their path, then all the better.
Mate, absolutely. I think that's probably where we get this real alignment. We were talking before about kind of the reach where, say this podcast will get in front of people that I'd never had the opportunity to cross paths with. They're looking for the right team to build around themselves. Very similar to what you do in the AFR. I mean, I still get it delivered on a Saturday morning.
Right, excellent.
And my two girls, we read it. We're talking before. I mean, you've got two grown-up daughters now.
Yes.
And I think even for you, we're talking about, how do your girls get into the property market? And they're probably a different age to where my two daughters are.
Yeah.
But the logistics of getting into the property market, the barrier is set higher.
Yeah.
And that's not going to get any easier.
No, it's not.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I certainly agree. The market seems to be running away from our kids, and it's getting harder and harder for them to get onto the property ladder. As you mentioned, I've got two adult daughters going through it. One's been fortunate enough to be able to purchase a property, but my other one is struggling. Different situation altogether.
Sure.
It helps with having a partner in the
As in
the mix, as opposed to being a single person trying to do it by themselves. Completely different demographic, but then having a partner can have its own risks as well and rewards as well. So
well, I mean, you both have to agree on it. That's the other part, right?
Without doubt, yes.
So I say, mate, you can't build a house off two different floor plans, and you need to get on the same.
True.
You need to get on the same page with your partner, and that can often be a battle. We've unpacked that a lot in recent podcasts. I've brought Bernadette, my wife, in as well. You've grown up with two different kind of attitudes towards money, attitudes towards debt, for example, different career, different pay, different ability to save. And I think you kind of come together, and it's like there can be a real, sometimes there can be a real clash, and sometimes there can be a real alignment around how we approach our financial future. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it can be tricky. I've got to say, I mean, from personal experience with my youngest daughter who's been able to buy a property, it's she sort of led the drive to get onto the property ladder. Fortunately, she had a partner and now fiance that went along with a lot of what she was happy to do. But they've landed pretty well now. But they didn't do it without my help, which has come down to the reason for writing that article is, the bank of mum and dad, and, the tips and traps about doing that.
Yes.
Because, when you have, a child and they have a partner and then you're lending money, then you've got the whole thing about asset protection that, what happens if you're giving them quite a large sum in order to help with a deposit, and then the relationship busts up, a couple of years down the track, then, unless you try and secure that somehow in that relationship, you can end up half the money walks out the door. So
it's an interesting dynamic because we're talking about family and finances.
Yes.
And then we're talking about relationship, and it's very hard to we want to help you.
Yeah.
It's hard to bring in this ugly conversation.
It is an ugly conversation.
What happens if this relationship doesn't work? And you're giving us the money. We want this to work. And it's right. And I think we will see the world through a different lens, which is now, I guess, call it risk.
Yes.
risk and reward, and so I've got the best intentions to help my children, but I needed to protect what we've taken so long to build. And I think
absolutely
every time there was a period at one point I stopped doing guarantor loans in our business.
Right.
Parents probably got in the way a fair bit. It was like, mate, we're going to risk the house. I was like, absolutely not risking the house. But after the Royal Commission, things have really tightened up around guarantor loans. What do they call it? Financial abuse.
That's right.
For example, of elders.
Elder abuse.
There we go. Right. Then there's wills and inheritance and estate plan that comes into it, for example. There's blended families that come into it. There's a disparity. If you help one child, you need to help the other child.
That's right.
But then where that child is now compared to where the parents either stop working, for example, or they don't have access to liquid cash. There is so much to get through in the conversation of the bank and mum and dad. We're going to have a little bit of fun with it. But if you're listening, where I feel you're going to get value out of this is if you're a child, seeing the world through a different perspective, but also understanding what unintended consequences may happen that you're blissfully unaware of. If you're a parent, what you need to be aware of as well. And I think this conversation becomes an enabler as opposed to the sky is falling conversation.
Oh, without doubt.
And I just want us to have some confidence around family and finances, which I think is a very mature chat to have.
Yeah, that's good. It's a matter of going into it with your eyes wide open to the risks. Because, though talking about guarantor loans, I've actually seen a number of cases where the parents have gone guarantor and ended up losing their property.
That's interesting.
And it's tragic. It really is tragic,
But to get to that point, Colin, and you say you've seen it a few. I have never seen it, and I've done a number of guarantor loans. So my view of the world is very slanted in the sense that I'm like, this is a great enabler. I've never seen it go wrong. And you're saying I have.
I have seen it go wrong.
What goes wrong?
What goes wrong is in the one particular case where the parents obviously went guarantor for a loan.
Yeah.
And that loan was to help with the purchase of property, but also for the business of their son. And of course, that the business went bust, went into receivership, liquidation, and so forth. And then the bank came calling, and the parents here in Sydney and Beecroft had to end up selling their lovely residence, and they've ended up in the regional South Australia because that's where they could afford. Went back to their roots and so forth, but it was sad. It was tragic, and see a lot of children take these loans. Or going, from thinking that the world's rosy and that they can't fail. That's the thing. And the parents go in with the confidence that the child sort of exudes in the whole thing, and then when things go south, then they're caught up in it. So that was so two cases I've seen where it has come into play, and the parents have lost their loan for the guarantee they've provided, which is sad.
It is extremely sad, and I think that's probably where. Parents probably go to worst case scenario.
Yes.
Particularly around the guarantor loans. To get to that point though, the bank has probably come to the party to help. I don't think banks, and that's probably where I try to say to a lot of people, the bank wants to work with you.
They do.
They absolutely want to work with you. So if you step back a bit and go, okay, what happens with a guarantor loan? There's usually maybe up to a 20% deposit secured against the parents' property as an equity loan. The property that the kids are buying then has an 80% loan against it. That's assuming they put no cash down.
Yes. Yep.
So it's a limited guarantee for a deposit. Now, what you could do is you could try and shift the debt back to the kids. If the parents needed their home back, you could shift the debt back to the kids' property, and you might incur paying some lender's mortgage insurance.
Yep.
Not a bad place to be, some extra cost of doing business, but it means the parents' property has been released.
Yes.
The only time I've seen that is when the parents actually had to sell their property because they now want to buy their weekender and they wanted to move out of Sydney. That's the only time I've seen it actually. They sold earlier than what they expected. So there's an exit there. The only other option or the only other issue there is if the child's property falls in value.
Oh, yes.
And then there's no ability to kind of push that debt, the guarantor loan back against the kids because there's negative equity that we're dealing with. Yep. Relationship is another one or hardship. And then at that point, the bank will be going after the kids' property as opposed to the parents'
That's
property.
correct. Yeah, that's right.
So the bank to go after a parent's property means we've got to plan Z. You've had all these other options. The bank will push the loans to hardship where they'll accrue interest like what they do with COVID. They'll put the loans onto interest only. I tell the kids, mate, go and stack shelves, drive Ubers, do whatever you need to make your mortgage repayments. The other part that probably I feel should be enforced is kids have to go and get financial planning advice.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this to sing any praises to the planning industry, but you're taking on new debt, which
That's
you're not
right.
covered for in any type of super.
Yep.
Is your TPD, is everything up to date from a personal insurance perspective, because you're taking on this new risk that
Absolutely
wasn't there
important.
beforehand.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel that gets overlooked. So if we do guarantor loans, we do it properly, there almost has to be some type of mandatory update to your insurances that you're covered for the extra debt you're taking on because the parents are now exposed.
Exactly. Insurance is so important to this whole equation, I think, but often people are balk at insurance because of the cost of it.
Correct.
Which is, we all know that. But it is so critical in this environment that, that you do have protection, particularly, salary continuance. I mean, you can get salary continuance, we know, through super and so forth, but,
but it's understanding even like, what's the wait time? 90 days.
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
If you're waiting 90 days, that's 3-4 months.
Right.
And that's now hardship on a.
That's right.
Your missed repayments, arrears, hardship on a credit file makes it impossible to then refinance.
That's the thing, because I mean, if you haven't accrued the sick leave to cover you for that, which you won't have, like that's a long time to so you're trying to use other resources and other means to get through that period before it cuts in and so forth. So it can be pretty difficult but insurance is a whole another conversation, as you can appreciate, and so forth. But
that can of worms,
it is something that is often overlooked, particularly, for example, even trauma insurance.
Right.
But the problem with trauma is it's just so expensive. That's the thing with trauma. But when it comes into play, it's a godsend.
I agree.
If you have it.
I agree. I mean, you mentioned someone that was self-employed before. That's almost the cohort that I feel is super underinsured.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've recently just gone through an updated key person insurance, business continuity, because now we've moved into a different phase of business that I'm like, we can have a vault or a bank account that's for a rainy day fund.
Yep.
But come tomorrow, if something happens to me, the expenses are still, the business still needs to keep operating.
There. That's right. Isn't it? Exactly.
Yeah, great. That's probably, again, it's expensive. It's been time consuming. I think I've spoken about this as well. I probably should get the guy that I got to do our insurances on as well, but just talking about unpacking that. To go, there's, and especially once you hit a certain income level, mate, there's blood tests, there's
that's right, and the disclosures are so important. The disclosures are so important, apart from the tests to qualify and so forth. But people do balk at it too because of sometimes it's due to ill health and so forth, and they don't want to disclose it and so forth. But you've got to do that, otherwise the policy is void, as you know. But otherwise, that's not to say you can't necessarily take out insurance. The premiums might be more, greater and so forth. But nevertheless, it's something that in this whole equation really needs to be considered.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Pertinent. One of the things I really loved when I was reading through your bio is the fact that you give strategic advice. And I feel like there's advice and there's strategic advice. Yeah.
There is. I think there's a big difference in providing advice in terms of a lot of the industry just provides sort of answers and means of, dealing with a particular client. But I hate the cliche, but, it is absolutely critical that you've got to give holistic advice. You've got to look at a person's overall situation and so forth, and not just give advice on a particular aspect of it without taking into account there are other situations like we were talking about insurance. You can't just do insurance. You need to know about their income, liabilities. Their whole plan needs to be taken into account. So you tailor that advice, and you provide strategic advice in respect of their whole circumstances. Yeah, which is absolutely critical.
Absolutely, and I think we're preaching to the converted because we actually understand what strategic advice looks like, as opposed to cookie cutter.
Oh, without doubt,
advice.
Yes. Yep.
And I mean, you say you're the financial advisor to financial advisors, which almost puts you in a unique position. You've got the best in the house going, these advisors actually don't know what they don't know. And it's no disrespect to them. Maybe they've got less years in the industry. Yep. You've worked across a depth and breadth of clients, for example. And we'll see this. I'll do loans for other mortgage brokers.
Right, yes.
Again, not tooting our horn, but I'm like, here's what you should be doing, and here's how you're avoiding mistakes. So if they're blissfully unaware of what strategic loan advice looks like, what advice are they going to give to their clients in turn?
Exactly. That's right. I love that term, cookie cutter approach, because that has often been the issue in our industry. Like if you went back a few years ago, which is happening again now, is things like simple things that advisors learn, like Financial Planning 101, and then do something like a recontribution strategy to when you've got your super and you've got large taxable component because it's accrued over the years with compulsory employer contributions and tax deductible contributions, a large portion of it's taxable. Now, that doesn't really matter if you're taking the benefit out after 60 years tax-free, but from an estate planning point of view, if it ends up with an adult son or daughter, they'll pay tax on the taxable portion of the benefit. So classic situation is, if you, when you're eligible, pull the money out, do a withdrawal and then put the money in as an after-tax contribution, which dilutes the taxable component, reduces the amount of tax an adult child will pay if they end up with the parent's death benefit at the end of the day. Now, if you go back a few years, I'm sorry, I'm talking about ancient history now, so many advisors would just implement that without thinking about other issues.
Yep.
And one of them was when we had, for example, anti-detriment payments, which was a top-up to a death benefit. If you just went ahead and did that, then you may have missed out on the anti-detriment payment, which could have been a bigger benefit than the tax component on the. So, that's what it's coming back to. You need to look at the whole situation and not just an isolated transaction. And that's just, one example. I know it's old news, but there's so many current day situations that applies to. You need to look at the whole thing and not just a transaction.
Great. Yeah, I think when you have that really broader view of the guy, I've seen this before. You've done 10,000 hours, for example. It almost rolls off your tongue, but it's to someone else that.
Well, a simple one at the moment now, if I'm just thinking further about that, in current day scenario is when somebody moves from the accumulation phase into retirement, having met a condition release, they've retired, they now want an income stream from super. There's tips and traps about whether you make it a reversionary pension or a non-reversionary pension.
Right.
So many advisors and planners have heard of the benefits of a reversionary pension as to how much counts and when it counts to the client's transfer balance cap. That's the amount that you can move from accumulation to retirement phase. And because reversionary pensions are treated different to non-reversionary pensions, the cookie cutter approach that I've seen for many advisors is to throw them into a reversionary pension.
Yeah.
But that may not necessarily be the right income stream for the client.
Yeah.
Non-reversionary may be far better for them. But the thing is, you need to consider all options and not just the cookie cutter reversionary pension approach to it.
I love it. Great example. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're sitting here because I read the article called "There is a Third Option for Helping Your Kids Buy a Home."
Yes.
And we were talking just quickly before grabbing coffee. And you're like, look, I do a lot of articles on super. There's a good following, good engagement.
Yep.
You put an article on property and bang, this thing goes nuts.
It did. It was amazing. I've been writing for the Fin Review. I've been providing commentary to the Fin Review for 2 decades.
Yeah.
I've been writing my own column for the Fin Review for about a decade. It's always been on super and SMSFs, which has always got good traction.
Absolutely.
But write the first article on Bank of Mum and Dad, and it went gangbusters. The response was phenomenal, I thought. So it just shows you property is first and foremost of mind for Australians. They love property.
Great. People coming in. This country's obsessed with property. This country is built on property.
It has a love affair with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
right.
So let's go through and unpack that a little bit. So
Sure.
we'll include the link to the article as well. But you said there's a third option. So let's go through the first two.
Yes.
And then we'll get to what you've suggested around third option.
Well, the most common form of parental financial support for a child when it comes to helping them get on the property ladder is a loan or a gift.
Yeah.
Then, of course, those parents that don't have the resources to provide a loan or a gift go guarantor, potentially.
So
that's
using
what we talked
equity.
earlier about.
Yeah,
that's
correct.
right. But any form of financial support, parental support, has its downside. There's no perfect solution to this. I think it's just a matter of what's the best option. Yeah. So if you look at the first two, which we talked about, which was a loan or a gift, often, a child will come along and go, like I did in my circumstances, Dad found a place I really want to buy. They fall in love with it, and all of a sudden the pressure's on that. Now, how do we finance it? I mean, you've had conversations leading up to it, of course, but all of a sudden when the rubber hits the road, it's a case of now I want the cold hard cash.
Mate, I joke. My little girls want it's a doll or a lolly. They're very small costs to make them happy.
That's right.
Now you do adult kids, we're talking 6 figures.
Yeah, that's exactly. We're talking. That's right.
Yeah.
You know, and then when you go along and you support your son or your daughter and go to auctions and find that, they just, get away from them because somebody else has just been able to give that little bit more, that all of a sudden, your contribution may necessarily need to step up to the mark to help them get over the line at the next auction and so forth. And then it's a case of, well, okay, let's talk about, do I gift it? Just give you the money.
Yep.
And that has its implications. Or do you make it a loan? And now generally, and what I've seen with our clients is that if their son or daughter is in a relationship, then often you look to providing a loan, because if they get into some sort of relationship difficulty, then there's potentially the ability to call that loan back. So the money's not, or half the money's not lost from the gift you've provided at the outset. So you provide a loan. Generally, it's interest-free, and you can call it back. You can get it back at call. But that has its complications because, as I found, and clients we deal with, is you provide a loan and you put a loan agreement in place that says it's repayable on demand. But then all of a sudden, when you take the money to put it on a deposit, the bank will then turn around and potentially ask for a stat dec saying it's a gift. Otherwise, they won't lend the money to the child. So that really undoes all the reason for putting a loan in place and the asset protection you're trying to put in place at the outset.
To give you some context, from my perspective, you go to a loan, the bank's going to go, where's this large deposit coming
from?
Where's it come
from?
It's coming from parents. Some banks won't ask a question.
Yep.
That's cool.
Correct.
Some banks will go, where's this large windfall coming from? Okay, it's coming from parents. So tell us more. Is it a gift?
Yes.
Or is it a loan? Now, if it falls into the loan component, well, do we need to factor this as an ongoing repayment into the bank's calculators? That shoots them in the foot.
That's right.
Because now their serviceability now has fallen because they've got to incorporate this loan into their monthly outgoings. But if you go, hey, look, the way to appease a bank is to then write a stat dec, you've literally just this whole loan agreement goes up in flames.
It does. Because obviously if you're on the other side of the party that's going to, miss out, of course you'll point to the stat dec saying, well, it wasn't a loan in the first place. You actually have a stat dec saying it's a gift. So therefore it's a matrimonial property. You've got that issue there. I mean, the other thing too is, as you said, the banks are concerned about where's this money coming from. Is if it's a loan, where do they stand in? Now, obviously, it will be an unsecured loan, but even that has its own issues. That the statute of limitations says, well, how long is that enforceable for anyway? So, and generally that's 6 years. So if you go beyond the 6 years, it becomes unenforceable. From state legislation. It's 3 years in the Northern Territory, and it's basically six years from day one when the loan's made. So you've got all these issues. That is it enforceable? Have you signed a stat dec saying it's a gift, which sort of unwinds the whole thing anyway. And to have
this conversation, we need it back. You're saying some parents say, look, that comes out of state.
Yes.
Some parents will say, look, okay, they don't even know about this 6-year rule. Relationship breaks down, get past the 6 years, and it's like a good lawyer will argue the case at that point.
Absolutely.
And we had Jared. So if you want to double down this topic, Jared from Dot and Cross that came in, we spoke heavily about this as well. I'm putting a lot of energy and emphasis behind this type of topic. It's rife at the moment, the banker mum and dad conversation. My research shows it sits anywhere between the 5th biggest bank to about the 9th biggest bank in Australia in terms of lending. It's such a grey area because they can't actually put their finger on how much parents are lending.
That's right.
Because it is such a grey area. But if we're talking about the 5th biggest bank, we've got our 4 banks are the most profitable in the world.
That's right.
And so you've got to understand the banker mum and dad's cutting into this territory.
Yes.
There's going to be questions asked about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting, talking about the dollars that are in, through the bank of mum and dad, because a lot of people don't want to disclose it because obviously you've got issues that come into play with things like, should I say, Centrelink.
Oh,
all of a sudden,
if you're lending, can of worms.
So that's right. Whether that be a gift or a loan, for example, if it's a loan, it's still an asset that needs to be disclosed for Centrelink, which is asset tested, and income tested, and so forth. But and then if you just gift the money, then technically the Centrelink deprivation rules come into play. So it's still treated as an asset for 5 years. Now, a lot of people like to try and, I shouldn't say this, but try and shelter, lending or gifting the money to the kids and not putting it on the radar. But, I do have to say that is obviously illegal, because you have to disclose this sort of information if you are on government income support, because it technically is an asset or a deprived asset. So, really how much money is is flowing around out there. So,
I guess the phrase that comes to mind is unintended consequences.
Yes.
Like you could really do something for the love of your child, but it has all these unintended consequences that come with it. If you haven't thought it through, it could bite you in the butt. It could have a major knock-on effect to your asset position in terms where you are in life, whether it's your
that's right.
Centrelink payments as well. It can also have a major impact on the relationship with the other kids.
Absolutely.
Or blended families as well. So do it for one child, you've got to do it for another. Step parents, and it's like, well, some parents are in a position to do that, others aren't. Then it has a knock-on effect around wills and estate. What happens if there's a death in the family and now contesting an estate?
Estate planning comes into it. It's something that's often initially overlooked. It's a case of, because son or daughter's found a property they want to buy, you do it, and then you try and mop up things after and go, well, hang on, that's now an asset. What happens if we, something happens to us, we pass away? How does that fall into your estate plan and your will and so forth? Particularly if you've got, as you say, they've got other siblings and they haven't benefited, and how do you compensate for that? It's okay if you've got a good, estate pool to be able to divvy up things at the end of the day. But if the loan is a large part of that, how do you compensate those that haven't benefited along the way?
Yeah, great. So we haven't touched on the third option. So what is the third option then?
So the other thing is co-ownership is something that can be attractive. It does have its issues, of course, as well. But where say your child comes along and says, I want to buy a place, and rather than gifting it or lending them the money, you take part ownership in the property. They might need say they've got they can borrow 80%, but they're looking at 20%. And of course, you've got, loan mortgage insurance, which can take a big chunk out of upfront costs, and you can avoid that if you step in and acquire part of the property with them, say 20%. It's the most tangible form of the support you're providing your child, because you're owning part of the property. It also means, and I've seen this happen, it also means that the child can't sell the property without your consent, because you're on title. You've got to sign sales agreement. I've seen situations where, mum and dad have stepped in and bought a house for their child, which is great. And then, in a few years later, all of a sudden the child sold the property and the parents didn't know about it, and they're up in arms because who funded the property in the first place, or part of the property. And at least this means that you still have control. You still have control of what goes on.
Great. Going back to unintended consequences,
yes.
Parents, let's say, for example, you bought this with your daughter, but you're in a different phase of life, retirement phase, or you come into a retirement phase, but then that impacts your asset position. Also maybe has capital gains tax implications as well.
Yeah. It doesn't come up without consequences. You're absolutely correct. Because obviously it's an asset, so therefore if the property go up in value, there'll be CGT implications, capital gains tax implications. Obviously, you're not living in it, so you're not going to get the main resident exemption. I mean, the kids will get the main resident exemption on their portion of the property, but a portion of the property will be subject to CGT. You've potentially got land tax issues as well. If you've got other properties, then it'll only add to your property pool above the threshold that you're paying land tax. So it does come at a cost.
If you then go to sell it back to the children,
yes.
excuse me, you then need to have an agreed value that you're going to sell it back to kids, and you don't want to feel like you're fleecing your kids, but is it at fair market value? Is it a sweetheart deal?
Correct.
Is there kids that have would there be stamp duty implications for the kids?
Absolutely,
as well?
There will be. That's right. I mean, obviously, if you pass away and you've left it to them in your will, it can transfer without stamp duty. But if you do it before death, you've got that implication on that. And also, if you've got sweetheart deals, what are you doing for their other siblings that what support are you going to provide them? So, you've got to be fair and equitable, I think. It's the only way to deal with things on that.
Because interesting, like it came up for you going, this is happening fairly quickly. Like we're being brought in.
Yeah.
This is a conversation that you want to have well upstream.
Yes.
With kids. The second they say and scratch this issue around property, and if you're a parent listening, or you're a child and going, when's the best time? as early as possible is the best time to have these
Absolutely.
conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, fortunately, in my case, I'm talking personal, is that my daughter was looking for 3 to 4 years. So I knew this was coming at some point in time. But the number of times I've seen with our clients where all of a sudden it's happening over a period of a month or two, because all of a sudden the kids looked around, found a place, and now how am I going to fund it?
That is normally the rule. That is normally the rule.
Yep.
And then the parents, well, then we've got to provide, the parents then have to provide effectively a fact find to us.
Yep.
So give me assets, liabilities. The parents like, who is this? Who's this broker? Yeah. Well, I need this. So I've got a relationship with the bank. That's another part that comes into it. We don't want to disclose our personal information. Okay. And then the next minute, we've got to organize a valuation on the parents' property. Like now the value is coming over. I didn't sign up for all this. Literally, that's what I'm like. The pin gets pulled and now the kids are in this precarious situation, which is we just want the damn house.
That's right.
There's a handbrake.
Yep.
What do we do around this? And that's where I think you said literally throw the cash. But some parents aren't that liquid either.
No,
they're literally asset rich.
That's correct. That's right.
Cash poor.
Yeah.
And
one thing to think about too that I'm doing with my eldest daughter at the moment is providing support, but in the form of helping her with saving through superannuation with the first home super saver scheme. Now, young people, obviously, well, anybody less than really about 40, 45 really in some ways now with HECS and cost of raising kids and private school fees for their children and so forth, just balk at superannuation. They don't do anything more than they have to through compulsory super guarantee.
It's almost like coming out of a back pocket.
Correct.
Feel like,
Yeah, but certainly don't overlook the first home super saver scheme. So by doing that, and this is where, parents and grandparents can potentially help. Not that they can make the contribution, but they could give the money to the child to make the contribution under the first home super saver scheme. So at least the money's invested and it's locked up until they purchase a home. The money can come out, provided the fund allows it. So if anybody's going down this path, and I stress, make sure that the fund you're contributing to will release it under the first home super saver scheme. I saw a tragic situation when part of helping my daughter was to help her with making super contributions that she could withdraw when she purchases the home. That's all well and good. It's in a tax effective environment. It's all attractive. And I know I can access it before I retire at 60 or 70 or 80 by the time they retire, and so they told their friends, and one of the friends started doing that. And then when found a property, turned around to take the money out of the fund, and the fund said, we don't release it for that purpose. And you can't roll it over to another fund to release. So unfortunately, that money's tied up to retirement now, and they needed that money for part of the property purchase. So, just food for thought.
Absolutely. Just to me, it all comes back to this conversation around, have you got the right team? Are you getting the right advice? If someone's saying no, or you got a gut feel that this doesn't sound right, keep knocking on doors till you find the right advice. And I think that's probably the part where it's like, don't abdicate your responsibilities to a planner, to a broker, to a buyer's agent. There's got to be some responsibility in here as well. And I think that's the part where I'm like, that's probably where the people that have that ability to grow a portfolio really take that personal responsibility and accountability. Okay, if that happens and things hit the fan, the buck stops with you, unfortunately, as well.
That's right.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
You mentioned here, because you work a lot, we specialize in high net worth and ultra high net worth. Do you know the metrics to be considered high net worth and ultra high net worth in Australia?
That's a great question, because I mean, we talked earlier before. We were saying that people on 6-figure salaries and things now. Once upon a time, we would have thought they're doing well. And
Mate, I've been quoted, I think, in SMH saying 250 is the new 100K.
Yes, I like that figure. I think that was a good, analogy that you said and so forth. But it really depends on, definitions and so forth like that. But very wealthy people now fall into the bracket in some ways of 10 mil plus of investable assets. So you've got the family home, and then but everybody has a different rule of thumb on it. But just salary alone doesn't cut it, unfortunately, or it's getting more and more difficult to be considered truly wealthy.
Is that have you seen that shift? I mean, you've probably been in the game for some time, with all due respect, and you go, man, what someone would have killed for 200K income 15 years ago, and now you're going, man, we've got people, I've got people there after graduating, software engineers or tech, they're on 200K plus shares, and they're on paper, it looks good.
It does.
Cash flow,
Yep.
abysmal,
Yep.
and they don't feel any richer.
No, that's right.
Well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the burden too on people like, for example, just things like cost of living and HECS and all these outgoings, that eat into that salary nowadays. And it is harder. And what is I was surprised too. Like as you said, 15 years ago, somebody on 200, 250 doing well. Nowadays, you start reading things about, like how people on that salary are struggling, and you go, how can that be? But then when you start, digging deeper and analysing it, you go, yeah, it is. It's so how do people on, 80,000 get
Correct.
by if somebody on 200, 250s finding it difficult? So
do you feel that middle class will get really squeezed, like to the point that they on paper they've got good incomes, but that middle class just suddenly gets eroded? I genuinely feel like they'll be compressed, that they're effectively just turning up for a salary, pay their mortgage,
just to get by,
modest holiday.
Yep,
cars are okay.
Yeah,
but they should be thriving, but they're very much surviving.
Just surviving, absolutely. And unless they come into, say, a windfall like an inheritance or to get them going again.
But even in inheritance, they're jumping. Sorry, mate.
No, you're right.
Like I was probably in my 30s when my grandmother passed away,
and
my parents would have been, I mean, at that stage, like late 50s, probably 60s.
Yeah.
So if they're relying on an inheritance, life has gone by to the point that's
so true.
I'm like, what are you waiting for this paycheck to come through from a grandparent dropping dead? In fact, that would have skipped them and gone probably to us if there was anything to inherit.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. That's what's actually happening. So it's actually bypassing a generation.
Yeah.
Because by the time you get it, you're right. You're nudging retirement anyway in your own right and so forth. Having children is, people having children are getting older now. Like many years ago, it was in their 20s. Now it's 30s or even 40s and so forth. So by the time you potentially look at inheritance, you're really
life has sailed.
Life has passed. So you can't be waiting around for that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
to me, it screams to me, you have got to take control back.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what we say about this podcast. If you're an active listener, you've heard me say the property market rewards action takers, decision makers. Now, property is not the only vehicle or vessel to invest in. Shares, ETFs, whatever your flavor is, find it, invest.
Yes.
But don't wait, because you can't be relying on the government support. I mean,
that's right.
Sam, great friend of the podcast, Sam Gordon, pensions life support, which I definitely agree with.
Yes.
Inheritance, you're playing a long game, a waiting game,
Yep.
and that's a poor game to be playing. It's pretty much like a Stephen Bradbury effect.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
As well.
Yeah.
Take control, stack the deck in your favor, buy some good quality assets, build up your asset base to get to retirement. If you can help yourself, then you can help your kids.
That's right.
You've got to take heed of that message. And if you're going to wait 10 years, that's 10 years at time that uninvested has gone by. The market's moving with or without you.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, thanks.
That's right. I mean, you were commenting earlier about government support. It really only can be ever viewed as a safety net, I think. Like a lot of people do rely on it because they don't have the means and resources, and that's their circumstances.
It's unfortunate if that's what it comes to. And I think what happens here, mate, is I've paid my taxes, therefore I get my benefit come retirement.
Yes. Yeah.
I disagree, and I'll pretty much go on the record to say I disagree with this. Just because you paid your taxes, that's not your retirement plan.
No, that's right. That's right.
That's for the broader economy, mate. So how does someone coming to retirement stack the deck in their favour, do you reckon?
That's right. And yes, you've started early. The message is obviously, as you've been trying to enunciate, is you really do need to start early and plan. Whether or not you can kick off a savings plan early is another thing, but at least start thinking about it, that when you have the opportunity and maybe, surplus income and the ability to do it, you start and so forth. Because, coming to age retirement, as many of our clients are starting to get to, you can't rely on the age pension. It is a safety net. But it's interesting, the psyche, as you said, I've paid my taxes all my life, I deserve it. The interesting thing that I've said, if I can, as I said to you earlier, if I get a dollar for every time I've been asked, somebody who's on the age pension that is about to get a windfall through an inheritance, and they go, I don't want it because it's going to upset my age pension. And you go, but hang on, if you take that inheritance, invest it, you'll be better than the age pension. You got to really think broader than, people just don't like losing a dollar of government income support on that. But one thing about, just going to the age pension is so many people focus on the pension concession card for the benefits it offers under the PBS and the concessions it gives.
So what does it give?
You can get concessions on utilities and your registration but the pharmaceutical benefits is the big, where you pay very minimal amount for your scripts and so forth.
Right.
But what people overlook is that if they didn't have the age pension, they may qualify for the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card. The Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, which is effectively an equivalent to the pension concession card. So people sort of often think, I need a pension concession card, so I need that $1 of age pension, and therefore I don't do as much as I can in order to, save and accrue wealth. Because one thing about this safety net, as I mentioned, is if you start looking about your investment strategy, so many things, are spoken about how, once you're, nearing retirement or in retirement, you've got to move from, say, growth or balanced investment down to conservative. But you might live for another 25, 30 years, which is another 3 investment cycles. And are you going to miss out on the upside of the investment market because you've gone conservative? Because, you're in fear. Now, if you can go for more aggressive in your investment, you always know that the fallback's the age pension anyway, so you can afford to be a bit more aggressive in your investment, knowing you've got that safety net. And, if you look at historically, you will always benefit from being invested appropriately.
Yeah, nicely said. Nicely said. Yeah, I think to that point, I mean, a good example more recently would be the amount of people that then, after the Trump trade tariffs, going, geez, my super just took a massive hit. And I was like, what? And then I'm talking about in their 40s. Yes. Well, why are you even looking at it, mate?
Yeah.
You are not looking to cash out on your super just yet. And so there was a massive kind of rush at that point to move into SMSFs to take control back. Am I going to
I've written, I've done a number of articles in the Fin Review, and I did one around the Trump tariff time that super always cops a flogging when markets take a dive.
Yes.
But I stress that super is only, as you know, only an investment vehicle, and it's how you're invested.
Yes.
Depends on how your super performs.
Yeah.
And the one thing I want to stress is that if you are making concessional contributions to super, you're getting a tax benefit. So how much does the market have to fall before you're worse off from having made that super contribution in the first place? And in 9 times out of 10, you're still better off having made a concessional contribution to super, because the market hasn't fallen by the amount of the tax benefit you've got from it. So I'm not plugging, but there is an article in the Fin Review precisely on this topic, that when it comes time to people going, oh no, I've got to stop putting money into super, that's possibly the worst time to stop making super contributions. Because then you don't benefit from the recovery in the market. You'll find that it all comes down to your marginal tax rate. So obviously, how much does the market need to fall? Like it could be, market needs to fall 28% before somebody possibly on the highest marginal tax rate is worse off, without paying Div 293 tax, mind you.
Yeah.
And so therefore you go, the markets haven't fallen 28, 30%. They've fallen a lot, but you're still better off having made that super contribution.
Yeah.
So, and of course, compulsory super guarantee, you've got no control over, but at least you know that if that money had been paid to you as salary, you would have been worse off than having that money going into super. So it's worth a read, just to
I love it.
provide more colour around that conversation.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I guess one of the zone of geniuses is superannuation and what people do. What have you seen? I guess there's a massive amount of SMSFs that are being set up. That then translates into people investing in property through a self-managed super fund. I'm looking for an opinion here.
Okay. My pet hobby. What's this one? My pet hate. SMSFs have a time and a place to start with, and then of course property and SMSFs another time and a place. But I think the first thing around is this whole thing about, I set up a self-managed super fund because I want control. You can get control in mainstream superannuation funds, superannuation platforms like super wraps. You have control how you invest. And you can go into the markets, you can go into equities and so forth like that, just in the same way you can in SMSF. The number of SMSFs I've seen that are set up and they're just sitting in cash or shares or managed funds, and you go, well, why have you done that? And they'll go, control. And you go, well, you could have done that in a retail fund or an industry fund without having the extra complexity, responsibility and duties and so forth. Why you're taking that all on, the time and a place for an SMSF, I believe, is if you are doing something that you cannot do in a mainstream fund. And that is things like investing in direct property. So that's a classic case. So, unless you're going to be going into collectibles or artworks or property or commercial property or whatever the case might be that you can't do in a retail fund, think twice before jumping in.
Yeah.
There's so many people out there go, oh, you've got 400 or 500 in super, you should have a self-managed fund. My question to you is why? Ask the question why. Yeah. Because for the control reason, I believe you can do across any platform or any fund in the industry. Okay, coming back to now property in super. Yeah. There's a lot of rules and regulations as you're aware of, and how you go about buying it, and how, more importantly, how you can use it. The number of people I've seen, well, I'll set up a self-managed fund and I'll buy a unit next to the university so my son or daughter can live in it while they go to uni. And you go, well, you can't do that.
Yes.
Things like that. Or I'll buy a property down the coast and have a holiday home and I'll go and use it over Christmas, but most of the time it'll be rented out. You can't do it. If you plan on using the property, a residential property this is, then don't use super. You can't. When it comes to commercial property, there's a time and a place for that as well. A lot of people like to think, I'll put my commercial property into super, and it has its advantages. There's no doubt about it. You get concessional tax rates on rental repayments and so forth. But the overarching thing I say is, if at the end of the day you're going to potentially qualify, take a step back. A lot of people put money in, their commercial property into super, thinking, well, once I hit retirement, then it'll be tax-free, when I sell it.
Correct.
If you qualify for the small business CGT concessions, it will potentially be tax-free at the end of the day anyway.
Double down on that for people who haven't heard about that.
Okay, so basically, if you qualify for the small business, for a lot of small business owners, their business is their super.
Oh, well said.
Their business
is that's their nest egg. For example.
That's right. So what the government's done is provided a lot of concessions to say, right, when it comes time to sell an asset of your business or the business itself, we will provide tax concessions where effectively the capital gain you make is reduced or even eliminated. And then we'll give you the ability to put that money into super, then take a retirement income stream through the super, which is fantastic. So the question I've got is, why are you putting that commercial property in the super up front when you can, and go through the transaction costs and so forth of doing it, which also impacts on diversification with a lumpy asset in super? Are you well diversified because it's all in property? Having your property in your business and use the CGT concessions later on, and then have a well diversified, investment portfolio in super, you've got the best of both worlds on that. Okay. It's not all concentrated in property and that's all you've got. Now, property works, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But with the small business CGT concessions, if you qualify as a small business, and there are 3 basic conditions that first must be met. First of all, your net asset value must be less than $6 million, or your annual gross annual aggregate turnover is less than $2 million, then you'll qualify as a small business. If the asset you're selling is then an active asset, and an active asset is one that's used in the business. So if you're using your business premises, then effectively that's an active asset. So it's not an investment asset you're just getting rental income on. It's an asset you're using in your business. And then depending how you structured your business, the third one, if you're structured your business through a private company or a trust, are you what they call a CGT concession stakeholder? Are you a major player in that entity?
Yes.
If you qualify, then you've got 4 concessions available to you. I hope I'm not.
No, I'm loving it. There's so many clients. I know so many people are self-employed listening to this.
Okay, right. So, and this is something that's often overlooked. So basically, if you've held that asset or your business for 15 years or more, and you're over 55 and retiring, so you're actually selling it to retire, then the whole capital gain that you've made on that property is exempt from capital gains tax. Then you have the ability to make what they call a CGT cap contribution in the super world, and put the proceeds, including the capital gain, up to a threshold of just over $1.7 million into super, and then start a retirement income stream or a pension through super. So you've used your business as your super, and then you take it as an income stream at the end of the day through the super system. If you don't qualify for that 15-year exemption, then you can, the next concession is just a straight out 50% reduction on the capital gain, which could be in addition to the usual CGT 50% discount you get. So, that's a significant reduction to only 25% assessable. Then you've got what is commonly called the retirement exemption. So if you don't qualify for the 15 years, you've only held your business for 10, you can get an exemption on the capital gain up to $500,000. So the first $500,000 of the gain can be eliminated through putting that money into super if you're under 55, or you can take it if you're over 55, but then you can put that money into super and take an income stream. So, there's so many ways to skin a cat. And the fourth one I should say is if you're certainly young, and I've seen this happen too, where somebody's maybe in their late 30s or 40s, where obviously don't qualify for the 15-year, want to use the retirement exemption, but don't want to put that money into super and lock it up until preservation age 60, can use the rollover relief and put that, buy a replacement asset or a new business and defer the capital gain. So you don't trigger capital gains tax at that point in time. So what I'm suggesting, coming back to our conversation about, putting a, commercial property into super, think about, well, can I avail myself of these concessions at the end of the day? Do I need it in super? Am I better off being better diversified by, investing my super through shares, managed funds, get the benefit of that side of things, then get the benefit of the CGT concessions, and you get the best of both worlds.
I love it. These are conversations that I've had our accountant, for example, when we do forward planning. And I think part of it is not all accounts are created equally. Obviously, this rolls off the tongue for you.
Yes.
You know about it. You'd probably deal with clients in this high net worth, ultra high net worth space where the tax implications, there's big dollars
Absolutely,
at stake
there
here.
is. And I will stress, and I'm glad you mentioned that about accountants, is this whole determination of the tax concessions does fall to accountants and not financial planners.
Great.
But I like our financial planners to have the knowledge to be able to have the conversation and to identify the opportunity, because I hate to say it, the number of times I've seen accountants, qualified accountants, that are not across this. So if you're out there and you are a small business owner, make sure your accountant understands the small business CGT concessions.
Mate, if your accountant and the litmus test you use for your account is how little tax you pay and how little you can declare your income, get yourself a new accountant. I don't sugarcoat things here in the podcast. I say things not to fire some shots, but just as a bit of a wake-up call.
Yes.
So many clients come to me just going, I've declared my income here. Mate, what you've done is you've shot yourself in the foot that you cannot borrow money to then increase your overall asset position because your mandate was, I don't want to pay tax.
That's it.
But hang on, but you want to claim whatever you can in pension state.
Correct.
You don't want to pay tax. Like,
you got to be careful what you wish for.
Mate,
you really got to be careful what you wish for.
This is exactly it. And then, okay, we can go to a low doc lender, but the rates are higher.
Yes.
You're balking at the rate. Yeah, but you haven't paid tax. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Put your money into, and the other scary part here, Colin, is as someone self-employed, they haven't been paying themselves super.
Correct.
That scares the hell out of me because so many years have gone by, you minimized your tax, you haven't been able to invest, you're not paying into super, the compounding position of being off track, you will not realize that till 10, 15, 20 years later. You're like, we've left so much on the table here. Mate, there are businesses that we'll hit payroll tax. You unlock a new level. Mm-hmm. You get to this level, you unlock a new level, land tax. I'm like, okay, taxes come at me. It's a success fee that we've got to pay. It means that you cross up to a new threshold in life. Mate, welcome to the next level. And the ones that want to shy away from paying the taxes, I'm like, you're only doing yourself a disservice. Whether that's clients that don't want to invest in Victoria because of the new land tax or whatever. Mate, just it's a cost of doing business.
That's right.
And when will if the pie gets bigger, there's enough to go around.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely correct.
Mate, I don't want to finish on a rant. I think we've had enough. We've covered a lot of turf, mate. And I really want to say thank you very much. It's one of these chats that I feel it's been a really elevated conversation for us. And I think that comes obviously in the type of clients that you work with, the experience that you've had as well, but obviously being very knowledgeable in your industry, mate. So thank you very much for joining us. Like I say, any of our guests come on are not here to plug, they're not here to promote themselves, but I genuinely say, like, if you do want to scratch an itch, have a chat to Colin. We'll include details for yourself. We'll include details to the articles that you publish in the AFR. Very much just going, we want people to kind of get good information from a great source. And that's what I think our chat has covered today. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Mate, thanks very much. If you know anyone that's kind of wrestling with these topics, conversations, self-employed, banker, mum and dad, superannuation / SMSFs, share this episode with them. It's a real banger. Colin, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.